get started in the next couple minutes. So. Ooh, that was fast. I was waiting for a few minutes of wine down there. Okay, so the next part of this that we're going to get into is a little bit about the design team and sort of like, you know, who you might want to have at the table as you start working through this process. I'll go, I think, fairly quickly through this, and then the second part of this one is about sort of codes, compliance pathways, and we'll probably spend a bit more time there. But I guess, you know, the next few slides, this whole notion of putting together a design team, what I really want to stress is that a good building is the result of a team. It's like there's no superstar stick handler, like one person has a very hard time or would have a very hard time making a really awesome building. There's like too much to know for one person to do it all really well. And the addition of like different perspectives and things is also really helpful. So so we'll start on the architecture side. So, you know, what the architectural side brings is, you know, the design, plan sets, and possibly building code compliance. Those would be the elements that person on the team would bring. And that can be provided by a bunch of different people. So obviously architecture can be provided by an architect. But in a lot of places, I'm not sure what the rules are in Alberta, but in a lot of places, an architectural technologist can also do home plans. In Ontario, if it's under 6,000 square feet and 3 stories or less, it doesn't require an architect, but an architectural technologist or a draftsperson can do it. Some professional engineers can also undertake that scope of work. Some building firms are design build firms, so they will have people on staff, one of those people on staff who does it. So by going to the builder, you'd also get the architecture, or you can do it yourself. And again, I'm not sure here, but in Ontario, as long as the home is for you, you're allowed to draft your own plans. You have to make sure you meet all the code requirements and stuff, but you don't need a licensed person of any type to do it if it's your own home. So, you know, you would want to sort of see who from that list of people you do want to have involved on the architectural side. It could be more than one of them. It could be just one of them, but, you know, you'd want to sort of talk to people and sort of see what services they bring, what they bring to the table. If you are doing anything that is at all outside of the prescriptive part of the code, you will probably require a structural engineer to handle any components that aren't from the prescriptive pathway. So that's typically going to be a licensed structural engineer. Some architecture firms will have an engineer on staff. And again, there's the engineering technologist in some cases isn't the fully licensed engineer, but can undertake that scope of work. And so that would be if you're either doing things that are outside of the prescriptions of the code in terms of size or conditions, or if you're working with materials that aren't prescribed by the code. You're typically, anyway, going to be asked for a structural consultant. Energy modeling, this is sort of, you know, not something that you would always find on a design team, but I think that person should be on every design team. So you can have either some basic energy modeling. There's some really cheap and easy free softwares. Hot 2000 is a Canadian software you can, you know, download yourself and work with. But we would sort of go for more advanced energy modeling using the Passive House software. And you can also get hydrothermal modeling. Typically, that's a program called Woofy that does the energy analysis, but also puts moisture into the equation and does it with more sort of dynamic circumstances. So lots of energy modeling softwares kind of use really good ones use daily average, temperatures and precipitation and wind and all that kind of stuff. Some of the worst ones use sort of like monthly averages, but the really good WWOOFy models are using, sort of like hour by hour. And so you get a much more detailed look at that. And so there are HVAC engineers, architects, building scientists, some rating systems providers. So if you're working with a particular rating system, often they can do that energy modeling. And again, like a design build firm or even yourself could tackle that. And again, it would be a matter of knowing what kind of targets you're trying to hit. If you're trying to get passive house, you might as well go straight to a passive house consultant. That would be the right thing to do. But if you just want to sort of see, is your building in the ballpark, you might want to just run a quick hot 2000 model yourself. Even I can do that, so anybody here can do that. So, so again, sort of think about your what you're trying to achieve, and then see who can help you do that. HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning design in Ontario, and I'm sure it's probably the same here. That's a separate design submission for your building permit. So you have to sort of like have somebody do the design for the heating and the ventilation. And so that can either be an HVAC engineer, could be the same person who did your energy modeling. It could come through your architecture firm, could come from a licensed building scientist. Some companies will do this in-house. So, you want a certain boiler and hydronic system. Quite often that company will sort of provide the licensed design with that, or equipment providers will sometimes do that too. Design build firms can sometimes do it, and in certain cases you could do it yourself. If you have all the figures that the code requires, then you could sort of fill out those forms and do it yourself. A project manager, I would say that, if you're attempting a home that has any of these ambitions, that person is maybe even the first person you find for your team. And it would be somebody who's going to sort of work with the whole team, quite possibly from the very get-go of the design process right till things are finished up. Sometimes that's the general contractor will provide that service, but they're not always the best person to do it. So think very carefully about this one, and are you your own project manager? Sometimes that's a great role for an owner builder, more so than doing the actual contracting on site, rather than being the person who's like hiring the electrician and hiring the plumber. The project manager is kind of like one step up from that, making sure that that person is doing that and making sure that there's good connections between the design team and the people doing things on the ground. So it depends, sometimes architecture firms offer project management. Sometimes like a design build company would offer that. So, you'd want to see who else is on your team, or know whether that's something that you want to do. But sometimes that person will play more than one role. It might be a general contractor and project manager, or designer and project manager. But I would think carefully about, making sure somebody has that role and that they know they have that role. And then the actual general contracting. So the general contractor is the person sort of like responsible for getting the work done. So that could be you, and it could be you doing everything. It could be you simply coordinating different trades that you're hiring, or this could be somebody you hire to do that for you. And again, like there are licensed general contractors, there are design build firms, and there's you. Again, a really important role. And I think it's important when I talked before about the importance of contracts, like to me, that's the key term in there. Like you are the general contractor, like that person, whoever it is, whether it's you or somebody you hire, is in charge of the contracts that guide the process. Like it's one thing, lots of general contractors think that by having a bunch of plumbers and electricians in their speed dial and, being able to go have an account at Home Depot and get stuff on site, that's not general contracting. That's like getting shit done on a job site. General contracting is managing the contracts. It's actually like having the documents and the pieces of paper that say, this is who's doing what, when, for how much money, from, what part of the scope of work to what part of the scope of work, all of that kind of stuff. So whoever that is, make sure that they are contracting and not just, you know, doing day-to-day site work and sort of rolling things along. Other participants who might get involved, if you're doing a renewable energy system, there might be somebody whose specialty that is, and you bring them on board. Sometimes your HVAC, you know, team could do that, but often it's especially if you're being off grid, it's good to have people that know specifically what they're doing there. Obviously, like electricians and plumbers and the installers aren't typically part of the design team, especially for residential construction. But honestly, if you can get them out to a late stage design meeting, so just everybody's looked at the plans and had a conversation before the thing starts, we've taken to paying everybody to come to that meeting, and it is always worth the money. Like the savings of avoided screw ups later on by, you know, paying everybody to be around the same table for half a day is great. You know, when the electrician can say, okay, well, I'm going to go here, and the plumber's going to go, oh, well, I was going to do this here. The HVAC person's going, yeah, but that main trunk's going to go right there. That mess up on site costs thousands of dollars. That 10 minutes at the meeting to sort that out cost you $150. So, you know, really well spent money to have those people come. If you are looking to do a super clean building, you might want to have your building biologist involved in the design phase as well. And if you're doing any sort of rating system, there's usually somebody involved whose job it is they're going to sort of assess your project in the end to see whether you get certified or not. So having them be part of that is really helpful too. So then the actual regulatory system and all through this, like, keep in mind that I'm talking about Ontario. I doubt it's that different. Like, all our building codes are based on the national building code, and then provinces kind of take and do their own thing. But I think everything should probably hold true, is true here as in Ontario. But for us, anything over 100 square feet requires a building permit. And from my experience, what people really get hung up about is the building permit, and they tend to forget all of these things that come beforehand. So it's just good to know what the whole process looks like, from, you know, having the right zoning. I mean, it's really sad, but I've had 2 clients who bought a piece of property only to learn that they couldn't build a house on that piece of property. You know, that sucks, because it's hard to sell it to somebody knowing that they can't build on it. And just, you know, in general, sort of like knowing, yep, I've got the right zoning, or if not, you know, what does it take to change that? How long does that take? What costs are involved? So that's something to think about. Most jurisdictions on Ontario now also have like a development permit, which is like a pre-building permit thing that says, you kind of say, this is about what I'm going to do. And they say, yep, you can do that. Now pay us a lot of money. So that's good to know up front. In Ontario, we have the Heritage Act. I'm guessing there's probably something similar here, but if you are, you know, have an old building that you're renovating, but even properties in Ontario can be part of the Heritage Act. If you've got, if you're on a heritage property, like, you can't cut down the shrubs, you can't move the tree, you might not be able to fix the barn, you might not be able to put your house where it blocks the view of the barn. Like, there will be all kinds of things that you want to check into there. If you're in a rural municipality, you'll need a septic permit prior to submitting your building permit. And so, you know, if you're thinking composting toilets, if you're thinking gray water, like that'll be a hurdle you have to leap before you even get to the building stage. Entrance permits, you got a property, it's got a driveway, cars can go in and out, doesn't mean that it's a real driveway and that you're going to be allowed to use it as a driveway. Again, we've had clients who bought wonderful pieces of property only to find out that, especially on provincial roads, it's like, yeah, you can't have a house there because you can't come in and out of that property with the proper sight lines and the speed of the road and all that kind of stuff. So you get through all of that stuff, and then you can worry about the building permit, which we'll go into in more detail. But part of the reason I point all of this out is that there's like a time and money chunk there potentially that a lot of people don't take into account, especially development permits, development fees. You know, in Peterborough now, the cheapest development permit, so This doesn't pay for your services. This doesn't pay for your building permit. This just pays to be able to be considered to build, is $12,000 for a single family residence. And we're on the cheap end in Peterborough. There are places where it's like $18,000, $20,000, $25,000. And that's just money that you don't get anything for except the right to continue with the process. Yeah. So, you know, even the entrance permit thing, like quite often it works out, but it's still money. It's still like $750, $1,000 sometimes to have somebody come out and go, yep, it's an entrance, it works. So, you know, keeping all of that in mind, that there's a bunch of potential costs that you didn't consider off the bat. And then you get to do the building permit. And in Ontario anyway, our electrical inspections are done through the ESA. So that's a separate authority. So the building official does everything on site, looks at the plumbing, the foundation, the structure, the insulation, all that kind of stuff, but does not look at wiring. So you've got to pay for and have a separate permit and inspection for electrical. And then if you get your way all the way through that, then you'll get an occupancy permit. So it can be a little daunting for sure. So the building permit part itself, in 2006, we switched to an objective-based code rather than a strictly prescriptive code. So it was a big leap at that stage in the codes. So the way the codes work is the National Building Code gets made. Provinces take the National Building Code and they can make things more stringent, but they can't make things less stringent. So changes that provinces might make, you know, have to make it harder. Do you guys use national, or is there an Alberta building code? Alberta. Okay. Yes. And then individual municipalities can make small adjustments to the building code. Mostly their input is around things that aren't in the building code, but your municipality will control things like property setbacks, maximum heights, you know, all of those sorts of things. How much of parking you've got to be able to provide, things like that. So there's that sort of layer as well. And then, like I said before, the building code has two compliance pathways, and you don't have to, your building doesn't have to be all one or all the other. But there's the prescriptive path, which for residential is part 9. And it's basically a list of all the things that if you do this, you are in compliance with the code. And then there's the objective path, which there's seven, I think, objectives and a whole bunch of function statements that operate under those objectives. And what you have to do if you're doing an alternative compliance is show which objective you're meeting through which function statement, and then proving that you're achieving that. So, and we'll look at what that looks like a little bit. So if you're going to go down the objective pathway, you're doing alternative solutions, the burden is 100% on you to provide the information to show that you're compliant. The building department's under zero obligation to help you out at all. Like, you might say to them, I'm building a straw bale house. What do you want to see from me? They don't have to say anything. What they say is, show me your compliance package. And so you don't know whether they're concerned about fire or moisture or R value or, you know, any of these things. A nice building department you can have a chat with, and you'll sort of get, they'll help you with that, but there's no obligation to help. And the code, so a building official gets a compliance package, an alternative compliance package on their desk. And the way the code is worded is they can look for test results or published standards or on-site tests or past performance. And that's important language in the building code, because what it means is you don't have to do all of them, and you could just do one of them. So what that means is a building official has every right in the world to go, oh, you're doing a straw bale house? Oh, and there's 4 others nearby and they've done just fine? Great. All that takes care of all their legal liability, all the stuff that they'll tell you about, oh, my municipality and we can't, you know, all of that is crap. Like, the building code says they are allowed to accept past performance as a way to assess compliance. Doesn't mean they're going to, but it is, you could argue strictly on the basis of past performance that it works. Since all of this came about, lots of municipalities now have like an actual alternative compliance application form, which makes things really easy. It kind of gives you something to fill out so you know what they're looking for. And within the building department, usually these things go straight to the chief building official. So if you've got a plans reviewer in a bigger city and they get an alternative compliance, they just put it right on up to the chief building official, who sort of has final say at the municipality whether or not they'll accept it. It's good to know a little bit about the objectives of the building code. And this is the core of any time I talk to building officials, which is my favorite thing to do, believe it or not, when I'm talking to building officials. Because the reason I like it is because they assume like, oh, here comes alternative builder guy, like he's gonna tell us all this stuff that we do wrong. And what I do is I tell them, you guys do a great job. I love what you do. I love the building code. And in fact, like what I'm really charged up about is doing an even better job of meeting the code than anything you've ever seen before. Because here are the objectives of the building code. They're pretty simple: safety, health, accessibility, protection, which means like of buildings themselves, resource conservation, environmental integrity, and conservation of buildings. So for me, there are what, is that 7? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7? Like I rock out 4 of those really, really well. And I really care about safety. And I also really care about accessibility. This one, I mean, if you do all the others, you kind of take care of that anyway. So what I'm telling them is like, yeah, I want to kick butt as far as the code's concerned. Like I want to do all of this and I want to do it really well. And it really sort of like, it takes it out of that dynamic of like, I'm going to tell you why I'm right and you're wrong. And I'm going to tell you, yeah, you're right. You're really right. And in fact, I want to be as right as I can possibly be according to the document that rules your world. So, so in all of our alternative compliance packages, you know, if there are any safety issues, which includes, you know, fire and all those sorts of things, obviously we highlight those and we do, you know, things about OS. I really make sure that we outline all the health benefits to what we're doing. So if the code says, you know, the building shouldn't cause somebody to get sick, then I'm darn well going to point out that the thing I'm proposing, part of the reason I'm proposing it is because it doesn't have any of the crap that all of these other things that I could have chosen to do have in them that aren't safe for people. So, you know, I point that one out. And then I really make sure that I'm sort of like talking about like resource conservation and environmental integrity. And in fact, I don't know if yours does, but the Ontario Building Code under environmental integrity, they added a clause specifically about greenhouse gas emissions. Buildings should not contribute to excessive greenhouse gas emissions. Boom, it's an objective of the building code. And so, you know, if I'm doing an alternative compliance, I'm going to point that out, that like, one of the reasons I'm doing this is because you asked me in the building code to not excessively emit greenhouse gases. So I'm bringing you a building that stores them instead of creates them. And so anyway, all of that to say, this is what you're trying to meet. And it's not like, there's no reason that like 99.9% of alternative things don't meet all of these requirements. So the door is sort of open to those things. This is just the wording of how the National Building Code says you have to document alternative solutions. It's kind of what I've just been saying. But again, really important stuff to know. And if you are going to do alternative compliance stuff and you're going to do it yourself, just read the applicable parts of the building code. It's shocking, like what a different conversation you can have when I go to a building department and they say, you can't show me that test, it's from Europe. I can say, no, in 2.1.1.2, you know, where no published test method to establish the suitability of an alternative solution proposed on this exists, then the test used for the purposes shall be designed to simulate or exceed anticipated service conditions. Boom. So if my European test meets the same standard as a CSA test, you got to pay attention to that. It says so right in the code. And you have a very different conversation if you know that and can point that out politely. That no, like everything you've brought to the table actually is following what the code is asking of your alternative compliance. It's really helpful. So in Ontario, if your plans reviewer has either doesn't want to deal with or has turned down your alternative compliance, it goes to the chief building official. In Ontario, if your chief building official turns it down, we have something called the Building Code Commission. It's a quasi-judicial board that gets together once a month and basically hears these cases. It's usually a lot of retired architects and engineers and building officials. And a decision there will override the chief building official's decision, but only in that case for that one building. So it's not really like, it doesn't change the building code or set precedent, but it says, you know, that if the building code commission has accepted it, the chief building official has to accept it. And we've actually been to the code commission at least 3 times where it wasn't even antagonistic. Like the chief building official pretty much knew they were going to lose by taking us there, but they did it because now it's somebody else's problem if it comes back to haunt them later on. So it's not always a bad thing to end up there. And we've been there 7 or 8 times now, and we've always won. So this is not a fun process. It sucks. It takes a long time. It eats up a lot of hours, but we have never lost. Like we have never gone to the Building Code Commission and not won, because the code is the language of the code is very open to alternatives. Despite how a lot of building officials sort of take it. And if you don't like your BCC ruling, you can go to the Provincial Appeals Court. Never been there or done that, but it's possible.
Is there anyone who knows what the equivalent in Alberta is? Is it somewhat similar? I'm curious. Do you guys have a
code commission? I don't know. There's.
BC similar to what we've got in Ontario?
I would think there's likely to be something. It would be rare if something stopped at the municipal level. And most of this stuff is not here for you and me and homeowners. This is here for like big developers. Like that's, you know, when we go to the Building Code Commission and they realize we're talking about a house, like for the most part, they're like, a house? Like you go ahead and do anything. We're talking about fire escapes on, you know, 80-story buildings, not, you know, does a strawbale wall stand up or not? You know, they don't. So I would imagine there's something along those lines. But yeah, so just to summarize, like know who you need to know. So we talked about the design team and the consultants, but especially if you're going to be doing sort of alternative stuff, there's a whole other sort of realm of like suppliers. Like where does this stuff come from? You know, if you're using egg products, who's, you know, where is it coming from? Who's the farm? Do they have it? Is it the right season? All that kind of stuff. The builders and installers who will sort of like work with all of the materials. I made the comment before about, you know, kick-ass German ventilation systems. They are amazing, but nobody in Ontario knows how to put one in, or, you know, even wants to try touching one. So you know, making sure that you've kind of made those connections before you've committed to those solutions. And then this lends itself to the contracting again, like just being really clear that the scope of work is really clear between everybody on site and on your design team. Like where does architecture stop and HVAC start, and where does electrical stop and HVAC, you know, like if you've got a hydronic system, where does the plumber's job begin and end, and where does the heating installer's job begin and end? So, you know, keeping all that really clear. And then I think, you know, as a homeowner, if this is what you're doing, like, you don't need to know all of this stuff. You just need to know what you need to know to ask the right questions to get the answers you need. Like, you know, you don't need to be a building scientist. You don't need to be a structural engineer, but you need to know like where those people come in and what role they're playing. I don't probably need to tell people in this room to do good research because you actually came to something like this. But you know, the advent of the internet has been a blessing and a curse for alternative building, because you can find out that everything is the best thing ever on the internet. And so, yeah, you know, just really use caution when you're looking at websites. Whose website is it? Like, who put this up? You know, do they have something to gain? Do they have a monetary involvement? And that doesn't mean it's bad information, just, you know, it just sort of like, it's careful with how you look about. And watch out for the too good to be true. Like, this material saves the world, helps deliver babies, you know, is non-toxic, you know, like if it does everything, it doesn't. Like, the reason that I can't stand in front of you and say, this is how you should build a really good building, is because every solution has pluses and minuses, and everybody who's trying to sell you theirs, and if they don't tell you what the drawbacks are, they're not telling you the truth. Like, there are drawbacks to everything. Even the conventional stuff has, you know, drawbacks. And so, you know, yeah, if what the line you're getting from somebody is that, like, this stuff is great, there's no problems, there's no issues, there's nothing you need to think about, backpedal, you know, or at least do enough research, you know, other than that to find out, you know, what those might be.
But it's location too, like Mike Reynolds and his earthships over there, where he is, going through that same process you're mentioning here.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, how good would he survive with his ideas in Canada?
Mm-hmm.
Under our conditions, under our laws?
Yeah.
Would he get to the same point?
Yeah.
That he was getting in New Mexico?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really interesting. You know, I have a lot of colleagues, because we're close by, and there's a lot of interesting building going on in Vermont. Vermont has no residential building code. So if you're building a house, you can build anything you want in Vermont. And I got to tell you, like, on the one hand, that's exciting, and some of the best buildings I've ever seen are built in Vermont, but equally, some atrocious buildings are built there. Like, the code, don't be scared of it. It's like, it has all the good intentions in the world. Like, you read those objectives, nobody disagrees with those objectives. A building should be healthy, good for the environment, safe, accessible. Like, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. So, you know, I would say, like, embrace that, and embrace it so that you're doing, you know, the best job that it asks you to do. Because what's sort of, you know, sad about the state of the building code right now is there are those 7 objectives, and then you start to read the prescriptive part of the code, and you will find 0 about health. You will find 0 about environmental integrity. Like, those things don't show up as actionable language there, but they are the intent of the code. And so, you know, the code is telling us to do the right thing. Like, it's kind of interesting because American codes are different. Like, in Canada, as an alternative builder, I can say, I believe in everything that the objectives of this objective-based code says. This is great shit. This is amazing language. Like, nobody else's building code says that excessive greenhouse gases shouldn't be emitted by buildings. That's an awesome statement to find in your building code. I want to, like, you know, uphold that one. So don't be scared of it, but kind of like know it well enough that you can go have reasonable conversations with the people who enforce it. And if they get that you have even paid the slightest attention to the code and have the slightest clue what's going on, and that you're actually, like, asking questions and engaging rather than being really either cagey or demanding, the response is completely different. And I know this because I spent the first half of my career telling them what was right and what was wrong in no uncertain terms, and getting into a lot of battles. And as I've gradually shifted to, like, hey, we're on the same side. You want awesome buildings? I want awesome buildings. Let me show you how awesome a building I'm going to make according to your building code. We haven't been to the Building Code Commission in like 10 years because we're better, I think, at speaking their language in a way that sort of takes them aback. It's like, oh yeah, you're on my team. Like, we're doing the same thing. We have the same intent. And so that's been really helpful. So that's the end of that part. I'll take questions if people have them.
So how much would that be? Because most of the people that they would get coming to them about sort of variances are trying to push the codes or, like, do it cheaper, or
yeah,
whereas you're trying to do it better.
Yeah, they're shocked by the notion that somebody might want to be doing it better. And in a lot of cases, they haven't even, like, nobody has ever spoken to them that way before, which is why I think it's been so helpful for us, and why we've been able to do so much stuff, is that they're so used to being on the defensive in building departments, so used to being seen as the bad guy, the person who's going to, like, get in your way and who you're going to have a fight with, that to be approached in a non-confrontational way, and in fact, like a supportive, I appreciate what you do kind of way, like it kind of floors them. And it really, it's been a huge help to us. Like, I can't say how different the relationships have been since we've started kind of taking that tactic.
Okay, and then who do you start with? Like I see, you know, a long list. Where do you start in getting into it and getting?
Well, I mean, for residentially, you're going to be appointed to a plans reviewer in a bigger city anyway. So the conversation would start with that person. And the thing to not do, in my experience, is don't go talk to that person before you've started designing. Like, you know, if you think about it from the building official's point of view, somebody comes in and says, I want to build an earthship. Can I build an earthship here? It's like, that's not a question that a building official can answer yes or no to. It's like that there's nothing for them to respond to. Like, in order for them to respond, there has to be a plan. There has to be at least something on paper that shows them, you know, what it is you're talking about. And then you could start to have a discussion about where you are or aren't in line with the accepted solution pathway, and then how you might deal with alternative solutions. So I think you know, you have to be far enough along the path that there's something good to talk about.
So is it fair to go and ask them about their awareness of existing, like, strawbale houses or in their municipality, or?
I don't know. My inclination would be to not. My inclination is to show up with really good design and paperwork and knock them dead right off the start, rather than, like, you know, I feel like asking those kinds of questions, they're immediately kind of like on their heels and starting to feel defensive. Maybe not, but in general, like, that's my sense of them, is like, oh, this person's gonna try to do something and I don't know what it is, so I don't know what to say. But yeah. Yeah, and better to go talk to the person who's already done it than to ask the building official if they know about it. Like, go talk to that person. Like, who did you talk to? What hoops did they make you go through? Like, what was the process like? And that'll be more useful than approaching the building department right away.
Just a question about their authority. So, like, they do have, there would be like an appeals board. That would be the authority that if they didn't want to do something, we could then follow up with them before we official. We tried to start a compost thing in one of the counties, and we reached out through other means to talk to the official, and they basically said, don't even bother because we're not allowing that no matter what. And we were like, okay, I'm glad we didn't spend $1,000.
Yeah. So, I mean, composting toilets and gray water and things are slightly different than building materials and systems, because I mean, first of all, there could be municipal bylaw things that aren't in the building code that they're also having to follow. So, you know, that, like, the municipality doesn't have its own building code, but it does have its own set of bylaws. So they might have decided outside the building code that no composting is allowed. And I'm not sure, like, that then becomes a different issue to address. Like, from the building code's point of view, you know, just, I don't know how many years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago, the language was changed so that, like, rainwater was no longer called sewage, because for a long time, rainwater was defined as sewage. And so there was literally no way in the building code to be able to filter and use rainwater, because you had to treat it as sewage, because that's what the wording said. So, but then that changed. There's now wording in the code that says CSA approved compost toilets are an accepted solution, and there's a list of them in the building code. So, like, there are code pathways to those things, but that doesn't mean that the municipality can't have a bylaw that says no compost can be treated on site ever, you know, and that would sort of then, the building code would let you put it in, but the municipality is not going to let you deal with it on your site. So, like, there's more complexities there than just what the code says.
So, when you submit your alternative compliance pathway, if the building inspector or the, sorry, I can't remember, the chief building officer doesn't accept it, it doesn't immediately get elevated though, right? There is an opportunity.
Either you have to take it to the building code commission, or they can take it to the building code commission, but somebody has to, or you could just drop it. Like it is not an automatic move to the next level.
But they potentially tell you where your submission package in their perspective doesn't meet the alternative compliance pathway? Like, is there
Well,
not
and
some
this
way
is
to
yeah, this is
you
where
need more tests, or if you need
Yeah.
to go and seek more
Right.
information, or what kind of.
So this is where, you know, different building departments will react differently. Like we work with some that, you know, the whole thing is done in a spirit of cooperation, and there's some that it's done very not cooperatively. So, you know, but anything you give in an alternative compliance package or in your code submission in general, it's by law in the building code, you can find this section where it says it, like they have to give you written reasons why this wasn't acceptable and point you to the line of code that they feel it contravenes. So they just can't say, no, this is no good.
Right.
They can say it's no good if you haven't given them anything. If you said, here's a straw bale house, they can say that's no good. But if you give them a straw bale house where you've outlined, you know, all these objective compliance pathways, then they have to say, oh, your interpretation of 9.13.1C, you know, but D says something else, and like, you know, it has to get that specific. Like they have to in writing tell you what line of code they feel you haven't met, and then that gives you the chance. Yeah. Yeah. And to be honest, like we've had to wrestle some building departments to get that, because quite often we'll just get that, no, this isn't good enough. And it's like, no, you have to tell me why it's not good enough. No, I don't. And then you got to like send the chief building official, you know, language from the code that says like, yeah, you're actually obliged to, within this period of time, give me this in writing. Yeah.
Yes, you've actually had that kind of. And then you get
Yeah. They, I mean, they will, they don't break the law. They just don't often offer you. Yeah.
Everybody looks all the way down, so you get a full review.
Yeah. And you know, lots of times, I don't know, maybe this isn't the case. I don't know if I've ever filed for a permit that hasn't come back with changes, and it has nothing to do with my alternative stuff. It's like, you know, I put a window on a stair landing that was 4 inches lower than the code says. I didn't know there was a thing in the code about, you know, so it had nothing to do with me doing an alternative building. Like you'll get a bunch of comments back that are just code things that have nothing to do with. Yeah. Yeah, but it's never been a one-shot deal for us. Like it's never been we submitted such a perfect package that we just got a permit back, you know, 8 days later. It's always been okay, yeah, we'll fix this and put it in. And if you're lucky, like sometimes then somebody else reviews it and they see something that the other person didn't see, and now you got to fix that, and it can go back and forth. But yeah. And you know, it's not, it is very manageable. I mean, at the start of my career, like my brain for legalese wording and my patience for dealing with officials, I was not a good person for doing this, but it's not that hard to do. Like that's what I realized. It's like it's a kind of a language. You learn the language, you learn the ground rules that everybody's supposed to operate by, and then it's like conversations with people who kind of understand the same language, and it goes so much better when it is like that. Yeah, the thing to remember is that if you want to start in April and you hand your plans in on March 15th, and then you're going to do all of this stuff, you're not going to be happy with how that process goes. Like you are not going to be in the ground in April when because you're looking, oh yeah, they're supposed to give me a permit within 10 days, you know, or something like that, whatever the rules are. And it's like, no, they're going to give you a response in 10 days. The response might be, we need this and this and this and this. And then you're going to have to go do that. And then you're going to get back. And then there's another 10 days for that. He can give you that response. And if that goes back and forth 3 times, then you're a month behind where you thought you'd be. And if you have to go to the Building Code Commission, you're 4 months behind where you want to be. And so, yeah, and that's one of the reasons that we put that, the building code compliance in our matrix is somebody who says 4, like, I'm not going to be scared of any alternative compliance. Let's do everything we want to do. That's cool. We'll do that and we'll get a permit, but we're going to tell that person, like, that's a 1-year process. Like, let's book a year. So if it's going to take 6 months to design the building, then let's add a year for all the permitting. Then we'll get you a permit. That'll be fine. But, you know, it's not going to be quick and easy if you're doing lots and lots of alternative compliance. So I'm going to actually suggest that we take a quickie break here because it's a change up in the slideshow, and then we'll come back for just before 3 and finally start looking at some materials.
Are you, no, you're going to talk about materials. That's my question, yeah.
There we are. Materials, it's coming. Yeah.
I'm saying the CSA approvals, deck numbers, and things like that. Are they part of it?
Yes and no. I mean, if you're doing something where a product already has a CSA spec written for it, you probably don't have to do an alternative compliance.